Before we dive into today's mystery, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It helps us keep uncovering the unknown. Now, let's begin. It was a night of December 20th, 1968, a crisp, cold evening in Vallejo, California. The air was filled with the usual hum of suburban life, with families winding down after a busy day. For 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen and her boyfriend, 17-year-old David Faraday, it was supposed to be a night like any other, a simple date out in the quiet countryside, away from the noise of the city. They drove out to a secluded road, away from prying eyes, looking for a peaceful spot to enjoy each other's company. What they didn't know was that they were being watched by a man who had been planning this moment for weeks. The couple parked in a remote spot, unaware that this would be their last peaceful moment together. No one saw the killer approaching. No one heard him coming. He was quiet, calculating as he crept closer. Without warning, he appeared at their car window, holding a gun. He ordered them out of the car. Betty Lou, terrified, screamed. David, his heart pounding, tried to act quickly but was shot in the face at point-blank range, his life extinguished in an instant. Betty Lou, still in shock, attempted to flee, but the killer calmly walked up to her and shot her in the back as she ran. Then, as the eerie silence of the night returned, the killer vanished. His escape was seamless, too quick, too quiet. When the police arrived on the scene, they were baffled. There were no witnesses, no motive, no leads. But this was just the beginning. The killer had left his mark, but no one yet knew the monster they were dealing with. No one could have predicted what was about to come next. The Zodiac wasn't done. He was only warming up. Less than a year later, in July of 1969, the killer would reveal himself in the most shocking way possible, by attacking another innocent couple. This time, his victims would survive, but their testimony would open a door into a nightmare that no one could close. On the afternoon of September 27, 1969, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia and Shepard were relaxing near Lake Berryessa in Napa County, California. They were out enjoying the beautiful summer day, surrounded by the serene beauty of the lake. Little did they know, the Zodiac was already in the area, watching them from the trees. The couple was enjoying their time when, suddenly, a man approached them. He wasn't just any man. He was wearing a bizarre, homemade executioner's hood, one with eye holes and a symbol of a cross circle drawn on it, which would soon become the signature of a killer who wanted to be feared. He drew a knife, a large one, and ordered them to the ground. He tied them up with a rope, then started stabbing them repeatedly. But the Zodiac wasn't done. As Brian and Cecilia lay bleeding and struggling to survive, the killer walked the side of the road and began to scribble something on the door of Brian's car. The Zodiac drew a symbol, again, that now infamous circle with a cross through it, the same symbol he had used before. Then, as casually as he had arrived, the Zodiac turned and walked away, leaving the couple behind, bloodied but alive. As Brian and Cecilia struggled to make sense of what had just happened, the Zodiac was already gone, his identity still a mystery. The victims, terrified and broken, were left with one chilling detail that would haunt them for years, his symbol. But it wasn't just that. It was his message. He was untouchable. He was out there, and he was playing a game, and he would continue to play it for years to come. The public was terrified. The police were baffled. But the Zodiac wasn't done yet. A week later, the world would hear from him directly. On July 31st, 1969, he sent a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle. But this wasn't just any letter. It was a taunt, a challenge to the police and the public alike. It was chilling. In it, the Zodiac took credit for the murders of Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, Brian Hartnell, and Cecilia and Shepard. But that wasn't the worst part. He also included a cipher, a code, a message that he dared the public to solve. He mocked the authorities, bragging about how easy it was to kill people and how he had eluded capture. The Zodiac even confessed that he liked killing people because it is so much fun. It was terrifying, unsettling, and sadistic. The letter's final lines revealed something that would become one of the most chilling aspects of the Zodiac's crimes. I will not give you my name because you will never catch me. He was playing a game. He was toying with the police, with the newspapers, and with the public. This wasn't just about murder. It was about power. the power to manipulate, to control, and to create fear. He reveled in it. And as terrifying as that was, it would be the beginning of a series of taunting letters that would last for years. But the most disturbing part of the letter? The cipher. A complex web of letters and numbers that seemed impossible to solve. With each letter, the Zodiac grew bolder. He wasn't just killing. He was playing a game, one that was far more twisted and complex than anyone could have imagined. His ciphers weren't just cryptic puzzles. They were psychological warfare. The first cipher, sent on July 31st, 1969, was 408 characters long. A seemingly impossible jumble of numbers and letters. It baffled even the most experienced cryptographers. The Zodiac was daring anyone to solve it, to uncover the secret he had hidden within. He wanted to be found, yes, but only on his terms. Days passed. Weeks. Then, in a twist of fate, a couple of amateur code breakers, Donald and Betty Harden, managed to crack the code. What they revealed wasn't the killer's identity, but something equally sinister. A disturbing, almost nonsensical message filled with dark thoughts and strange symbols. The Zodiac had played the game and won, leaving everyone on edge. But the most chilling part? It didn't end there. In November of 1969, the Zodiac sent another cipher. This one was 340 characters long. Unlike the first cipher, this one wouldn't be solved for decades. The police, the public, and cryptographers around the world were stumped. It was as if the Zodiac had purposely created an unsolvable puzzle, one that would taunt the world for years to come. The sense of helplessness and fear grew. The Zodiac was not just a killer, he was a mastermind, and he was still out there, watching, waiting, playing his game. As if the ciphers weren't enough, the Zodiac continued to send more letters, each one more twisted than the last. He sent a Halloween card in 1970, addressed to the San Francisco Chronicle, with a bizarre message that read, "I hope you have lots of fun trying to catch me." It was as if he enjoyed every minute of his notoriety, as if the fear he caused was a game to him, a game he was winning. With each new letter, the public grew more terrified, more obsessed. Who was this man? What did he want? And most chilling of all, where was he? Was he right next to you, watching, waiting for his next victim? The Zodiac's terror spread beyond the Bay Area. His letters, his symbols, and his games became a nationwide obsession. The media plastered his letters on the front pages. Police departments across the country scrambled to find clues. But no one could catch him. No one could predict where he would strike next. But the Zodiac wasn't finished. He wasn't just trying to evade capture. He was feeding on the fear he created. And the more terrified the public became, the more powerful he felt. The Zodiac Killer wasn't just a murderer. He was a master manipulator. His killings were only part of his sickening game. His letters were a way to control the narrative, to stay in the limelight, and to taunt the police, the media, and the entire nation. With each new letter, he proved how much power he held over everyone. He wasn't just out for blood. He wanted the world to tremble at the thought of him. One of his most notorious letters was sent on July 31st, 1969. It wasn't just a letter. It was a declaration of war against society. The Zodiac Killer took credit for the brutal murders of Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, Brian Hartnell, and Cecilia and Shepard. But it didn't end there. He included a chilling 408-character cipher. The killer wrote that he would no longer be part of your so-called hunt, making it clear that he was in control. The taunt was undeniable. "I like killing people because it is so much fun." The Zodiac openly relished in his cruelty, as if it were a game he had already won. But this letter wasn't just a sick confession. It was a challenge to everyone. The Zodiac dared the public to solve the cipher, to uncover his true identity. He seemed to be saying, "You can't catch me. You'll never stop me." And so began a terrifying cat-and-mouse game that would last for years. The Zodiac Killer wasn't content just to kill. He had to be the center of attention, the puppet master controlling the strings of fear. Each new letter, each new cipher, further solidified his reign of terror over the Bay Area. The Zodiac Killer's terror didn't stop at letters and ciphers. He left survivors, people who had witnessed firsthand the raw brutality and sheer madness of his acts. And perhaps the most chilling survivors were Brian Hartnell, and Cecilia and Shepard, the couple attacked at Lake Berryessa on September 27, 1969. On that day, the Zodiac approached them at the lake, wearing a bizarre, homemade executioner's hood, its eye holes barely cut out. The symbol of the Zodiac, his signature circle with a cross through it, was prominently displayed on his chest. He looked more like something out of a nightmare than a human being. He walked up to the couple and with a cold, calculating demeanor, he tied them up and began to stab them. Brian Hartnell, who had been enjoying a peaceful day on the lake with Cecilia, was suddenly thrust into a terrifying fight for his life. The Zodiac stabbed them both repeatedly, yet what was even more chilling was the way he taunted them during the attack. But it wasn't just the stabbings that horrified them. After brutalizing them, the Zodiac did something that would forever etch his insanity into their minds. He drew his symbol on the side of Brian's car. He was leaving a message, a sign that would haunt anyone who saw it. But the truly terrifying part came after. The Zodiac casually walked away, leaving Brian and Cecilia, bloodied, broken, and shaken, behind. In a cruel twist of fate, the killer let them survive, knowing the psychological damage it would cause. He knew they would be left with only fragments of his face, only the symbol he had left, and only his terrifying words to haunt them. He didn't need to kill them all the way. He wanted them to live with the terror. The Zodiac wasn't after a clean kill. He wanted to create fear that would never fade. For most killers, once a crime was committed, the satisfaction would fade. But not for the Zodiac. He craved attention. He needed to feel like he was always in control, always one step ahead of the authorities. And so, he continued to send letters. His messages became more chilling, more cryptic, and more sadistic. In 1970, he sent a Halloween card to the San Francisco Chronicle, further cementing his status as a master of manipulation. On the front of the card was a grotesque design, a drawing of a pumpkin, but it was far from innocent. The message inside was just as disturbing. I hope you have lots of fun trying to catch me. It was a sickening taunt, a way for the Zodiac to mock the police and the public. This letter was just another piece of his game. He wasn't just trying to scare people. He was enjoying the fear. The fact that his letters had become a regular feature of the news made him feel more powerful. It wasn't enough that he had killed. No, he needed the entire world to tremble at his name. And the world did. The Zodiac's letters were a sensation. They were dissected, analyzed, and feared. But they were also baffling. He never gave any direct clues to his identity, just more puzzles, more twisted games. And as the months passed, the fear and obsession only grew. His psychological manipulation was brilliant. He was no longer just a killer. He was a symbol of fear, a phantom who could disappear into thin air, leaving only cryptic messages behind. After his first letter, which included a 408-character cipher, the Zodiac sent a second cipher, this one even more complex. It was a 340-character cipher, and it would remain unsolved for decades. It was the killer's way of ensuring that no one would ever truly figure him out. He wasn't just playing with letters and symbols. He was playing with the minds of those who tried to decode him. For years, the police and amateur cryptographers worked tirelessly to solve the cipher, but it remained locked. The fear grew as people began to wonder if the Zodiac was still out there, watching and laughing as they struggled to understand his twisted mind. What was even more chilling was that the Zodiac had made it clear he was just getting started. With each new cipher, with each new letter, he was reaffirming his superiority. It was as though he was daring the world to try and stop him. In 2020, over 50 years later, the 340-character cipher was finally solved by a team of codebreakers. But the message wasn't a revelation. It wasn't a clue to his identity. It was more of a mockery. The decoded cipher revealed a string of nonsensical phrases, nothing that gave any true insight into Zodiac's mind. But the most chilling part was this. Even after all these years, his game had continued. The Zodiac Killer was still present, still powerful, still manipulating the world from behind the veil of mystery. By the early 1970s, the Zodiac Killer had disappeared. The murders stopped. The letters stopped. He vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the unsettling reminder that he had once terrorized the entire Bay Area. But despite his disappearance, the legend of the Zodiac Killer lived on. His name became synonymous with fear, mystery, and unsolved horror. The haunting questions lingered. Who was he? Why did he stop? Had he killed more victims that we didn't know about? Or had he simply faded into the shadows, waiting for the next game to begin? Some speculated that he had died. Others believed he had been caught and hidden in plain sight. But the truth remains elusive. The Zodiac left no answers. And that's what made him even more terrifying. He was the perfect monster. A ghost who could never be caught. A killer whose identity was never fully uncovered. As the years have gone on, the mystery of the Zodiac Killer has continued to haunt the public. His case has been the subject of countless documentaries, books, and films. But the truth remains hidden, locked away behind the cryptic messages he left behind. The killer's power was never just in the murders he committed. It was in his ability to control the story, to play with the minds of those who sought to catch him. The Zodiac Killer had taunted the world for years, leaving behind a trail of murder, terror, and cryptic letters. But then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he vanished. After the last confirmed murder in 1969, the Zodiac's reign of terror seemed to come to an abrupt end. The letters stopped coming. The killings stopped. It was as though the killer had slipped away into the shadows, leaving the world to wonder if he had simply grown bored with his games, or if something more sinister had happened. At first, people thought it was just a temporary hiatus. After all, the Zodiac had seemed to thrive on the fear he created. Would he really just stop? But as the months turned into years, it became clear that the killer was gone. By 1974, the San Francisco Bay Area was living in a state of uneasy peace. The Zodiac's absence didn't bring closure. It brought confusion and fear. The most chilling part was the uncertainty. Was the Zodiac dead? Was he still out there, hiding in plain sight? Or had he simply found another city to terrorize? As time went on, the case grew colder. Despite the best efforts of the police, despite the national media attention, the Zodiac had disappeared. And in his wake, he left a lingering question. How could a killer like him just vanish, never to be heard from again? The Zodiac Killer's disappearance didn't mean the end of his influence. In fact, his silence made him even more terrifying. The legacy of fear he created continued to haunt the Bay Area and the rest of the world for decades. He had taken something more than lives. He had stolen a sense of safety, a feeling of normalcy. People were left to wonder whether the Zodiac was still among them, quietly watching, waiting for the perfect time to strike again. Could he be living a quiet life under a new name? Was he someone in their midst, a neighbor, a friend, a family member? The thought was terrifying, and the idea that the Zodiac was still alive, still out there, was a specter that lingered for years. In the 1970s and 1980s, reports of potential sightings and rumors about the Zodiac's identity surfaced. Some believed he was someone close to the victims, someone who had slipped through the cracks of the investigation. Others speculated that he had been caught, but was living under a new identity. The questions were endless. The horror didn't end with his disappearance. It morphed into a constant, unsettling fear that perhaps the Zodiac was more than a killer. He had become a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that evil could be hidden anywhere, waiting to resurface. Even with the Zodiac's disappearance, the search for him never stopped. A steady stream of suspects emerged over the years, each one presenting a new theory about the killer's identity. The police, along with amateur sleuths, became obsessed with the idea that the Zodiac could be unmasked. But despite the numerous theories, no one could pin down the man behind the mask. The most famous suspect was Arthur Lee Allen, a convicted child molester who had been linked to the case based on circumstantial evidence. Some of his behavior and movements seemed to fit the profile of the Zodiac, and he had even confessed to being the killer. But the evidence was flimsy. Allen was never charged, and many investigators remained unconvinced that he was the Zodiac. Other suspects came and went, each one providing a new lead, but never quite solving the puzzle. There was Richard Gaikowski, a journalist whose physical appearance and behavior led some to suspect him. Then there was Earl Van Best Jr., whose alleged connection to the Zodiac case was brought to light years after the fact, based on the theory that he was the father of the Zodiac's first victim, who had been murdered in 1968. However, none of these theories were ever conclusively proven. With each new suspect came renewed hope, but with each failed lead, the mystery of the Zodiac deepened. The killer had left no solid clues, no fingerprints, and no conclusive DNA evidence. He was a ghost, impossible to capture, and the search for him became an obsession that would last for decades. In 2002, a breakthrough occurred when DNA from the Zodiac's letters was tested. Although the results weren't enough to conclusively identify the killer, they revealed a potential lead, a partial DNA profile. But even with this new development, there was still no way to directly connect the killer to the crime scene. But the case didn't remain stagnant. In 2018, a new chapter in the investigation began, when a team of forensic scientists used genetic genealogy to try to find a match to the Zodiac's DNA. This technique had already been used to crack other high-profile cold cases, such as the Golden State Killer case, and offer hope that the Zodiac might one day be unmasked. The breakthrough came in 2020, when the FBI released a statement acknowledging that they were still investigating the case, albeit with few concrete leads. Despite this, a new wave of online investigators and amateur sleuths took up the hunt, utilizing online tools and databases to find potential family connections to the Zodiac's DNA. It was a digital-age pursuit of a killer who had long ago become a shadow. For the first time in decades, the Zodiac Killer's case was thrust back into the spotlight. The fear that had gripped the Bay Area in the late 1960s and 1970s came rushing back, as people once again grapple with the chilling possibility that the killer's identity was closer than ever to being revealed. But even with all the modern technology at their disposal, the killer's true identity remained elusive. As the case continued to garner attention in the media and online communities, one question still loomed. Who was the Zodiac Killer? Despite the technological advancements in forensic science, the Zodiac's identity remained frustratingly out of reach. There was a sense of impending closure, an expectation that, finally, the killer would be unmasked. But even as the investigation pressed forward, it became clear that some things would never be known. What if the Zodiac Killer had simply grown bored with the game? What if he had passed away, taking the secret of his identity with him? Some experts believe that the Zodiac may have been a victim of his own ego, too obsessed with fame to keep committing murders, and too arrogant to believe he would ever be caught. Perhaps he believed that even if he died, his legacy would live on, and the world would forever be haunted by the fear he created. But what if he hadn't died? What if he was still out there, a shadow in the crowd, watching the investigations unfold from afar, waiting to see if the world could ever truly catch up to him? The mystery of the Zodiac Killer remains one of the most chilling unsolved cases in history USA. The terror he unleashed in the late 1960s and early 1970s never truly went away. It faded, yes, but it has lingered, haunting the people who lived through it and casting a shadow over those who would come after. Whether the killer was an average man or a master of psychological terror, his game is far from over. The Zodiac Killer may never be identified, but one thing is certain. His name will live on forever as a symbol of unspeakable terror, a reminder of the monster who disappeared into the night, leaving behind only fear, letters, and cryptic messages that may never be solved.